Good day and welcome to the exam-based contact classes for 2018 for the course Professional and Community Development. Now for this presentation, we're going to go through the outline of the presentation. So the outline of the presentation, first of all, we're going to be looking at the aim of the examination-based contact classes. Why do we do this presentation? We'll quickly look at that. We'll then go through the general instructions. Some of these things you might already know, you might already be familiar with, but we'll just quickly go through them. We'll then look at common errors by student made in the examination. There are certain errors or mistakes that students keep repeating year after year. And we want to just look at this so that we can avoid making the same mistakes or continuing to make the same mistakes. We then look at the unit outlines. We are aware that the book is quite thick, and this is not the only subject that you have. Therefore, it's very important that you stay focused. It's impossible to read the whole book since you have other subjects. But so we'll look at the unit outlines for the exams. And then we'll conclude. As stated, the first thing is we look at the aim of the examination-based contact classes. There are two main aims. First of all, we want to provide guidance on how to approach the examination questions. It's a skill. Most times students would study and still not attain the marks that they deserve based on their studying, simply because they don't know how to approach the examination questions. So that is a skill that students need to learn. It's not enough for you to study. It's very important that you learn how to approach an examination question at a high institution. And then the second aim is to caution students not to make common mistakes made by previous students in the examination. There are certain mistakes or errors that students make that sometimes count against them getting full marks. And so the aim for this presentation is also then to look at these common errors and then see how we can help students to avoid these pitfalls. Moving on, let's look at the general instructions of the examination. First of all, please write your name clearly, ID number, state examination center. All these are on the cover page of the exam. So these are clearly indicated. It's just for the students to write it clearly and neatly. At all times, avoid scratching. So just take note of that. The other general instructions that we want students to really pay attention to is that questions should be answered on the question paper as provided, at the spaces provided. Sometimes we get students scratching and then writing at the back or writing at the bottom. While we acknowledge that such mistakes can be done and are understandable, we urge students to avoid making these mistakes. Scratching, writing at the back, writing at the bottom, writing at the top, where the space is not provided. So at all times, avoid making such big mistakes. And this mistake of scratching and then writing at the bottom or at the back of the page usually happens because students don't read instructions. You start writing, you jump straight to answering questions, and because you're scared you're going to forget what you studied. I was also once a student. So you jump quickly to answering questions without first reading the instructions. And then you realize you've made a mistake, and then you have to scratch the whole quarter of a page and then find another space to write. So please just be careful, go through the instructions and read the questions carefully. There are no alternative questions. That means you get to answer all questions presented to you. There are no, you're not given the choice to choose questions, and all the questions in the question paper is out of 120 marks. Please, and this is very important, it's also part of one of the mistakes that students make. Use the mark allocation for each question as a guide for how many facts are needed. If the question is out of 4 and it says state 4 facts, it's very important that you state 4 instead of stating 1 and then explaining that 1 fact. You still get a 1 mark, and the rest of the information is disregarded. So it's very important that you use the mark allocation to guide you on how much to write. The other thing that you need to understand is that you're given a certain amount of time to finish the exam paper. So if you don't look at the mark allocation to guide you on how much to write, you might find that you've run out of time before completing the examination paper. So it's very important that you use the mark allocation to guide you on how much to write, because this would also help you to manage your time. Further on, write neatly and legibly. The golden rule is if I can't read it, I can't mark it. And we know that we all have different handwriting, but writing neatly has nothing to do with your handwriting style. It simply has to do with you taking the time to make sure that you write in such a way that the next person can read and make out what you are trying to, what you wrote down. So if I can't read it, I can't mark it. Simple as that. On the 6th point, please consider the level of the verb. Now, in your guide, the verbs are explained. The verbs are properly outlined and defined and explained. Please, before you, as part of your examination preparation, go through this one page. It's a page, if I'm not mistaken, that you just have to read and familiarize yourself with. Like I said, it's not enough for you to just study the material. You need to know how to approach the exam paper. And part of that knowledge of how to approach the examination paper entails you understanding the verbs and the level of the verbs. The question might say, explain a certain phenomena, or it might say, describe. It might say, just name or mention. So it's very important that you can differentiate between these verbs. And if you can't, there lies some of your marks. So it's very important that you consider the level of the verb. Explain would normally require more writing, more defining, and more explanation, whereas mention would just be stating the facts. So it's very, very important that you understand the differences between these verbs. It's not enough for you to understand the content. You need to be able to translate that content onto paper in the examination. And part of that is you understanding what the question is asking. Another point that you need to consider is that cheating in the examination paper, during the examination, will result in a failure grade. Now, this is part of the IOL rules and regulations. If you caught cheating, you will be disqualified. So do not put yourself in a compromising position. Whether you write on your hand, whether it's relevant to the exam or not, avoid writing on your hands, avoid going in with small papers. I'm sure you're not allowed to bring in cell phones, so stick to the rules. And because anything you do that might cause the invigilators to be suspicious will result in you forfeiting the examination rights. So please be careful. Another matter that we need to look at when you look at the general instructions of the exams is if you're caught cheating or in any way disturbing the examination session, steps will be taken against you. So those are part of the examination IOL rules and regulations. You cannot disturb an examination session. It's unfair for other students, to other students. So moving on. So we say that we also look at the common errors or mistakes made by students during the exams. So let's look at this. The first one we want to look at is one of the reasons why examinations are written is to test the student's understanding of the theory. Now, the guide gives you the theory, but then we don't just want to ask you to regurgitate or bring back, retrieve information. We want to assess your understanding of the content. So normally when we ask questions that should demonstrate understanding of the, not only of the question, but also of the content, most students fail. For example, a question can come, name 2 types of communication styles. And then the student would answer, teachers are important, teachers must be nice to learners. And this answer, as plausible as it is, has nothing to do with the question asked. So if you look at the question, it says name 2 types of communication styles. And the student simply wrote 2 sentences, which have nothing to do with the communication styles. And so it's not about whether the sentences are correct or not, whether what you said is important or not, is that it doesn't match the question asked. And therefore you get a 0. We've seen this repeatedly with students doing this same mistake. So please read the questions carefully and make sure you understand what the question requires. Many questions can be made out of the same facts. So a question on a topic on communication can ask different types of communication. It can ask you to describe one communication style. It can ask you to link or to state the importance of communication in teaching. So you cannot just read the theory on communication and then just copy and paste it on any question where you see communication. And this is what I think students do. They just look for the keyword and write whatever they can remember studying about that specific topic. And so you lose marks. It's clear that you've studied. It's clear that you know the content, but you don't link the content of what you've studied to the question. So just be careful of this pitfall, that you don't just state facts because you can remember them. So you studied, you remember a fact, and then you write it down. It doesn't work that way. You need to be able to link the content, the facts, to the questions. Therefore, you are more likely to gain your full marks. Another second mistake that we've picked up from students over the years is that students do not demonstrate understanding of the different verbs. Once again, we're going back to the verbs, stressing the importance of understanding verbs. The verb tells you the instructions. The verb contains the instructions. So if you just look at the keywords in that sentence, based on what you can remember from studying the theory, if, for example, the question says, discuss the following factors. So it's very important for you not just to look at the factors, but to also look at the word discuss. What does discuss mean? This means write about something in detail, taking into consideration the different views and ideas that are stated in the theories. And then, if necessary, drawing a conclusion. So many times students don't get marks simply because they don't understand the verb that is at the beginning of the sentence, usually at the beginning of the sentence or the question. So it's very important, once again, that you understand the verbs. We've seen many students that have studied, They stated facts, but the facts are not in line with the verbs. So if you are asked to explain, you cannot list or mention. If you are asked to list, you cannot explain. For example, if you are asked to list, name, state, mention the 5 effects of poverty on students, you need to just list it instead of going into stating one fact and then explaining this one fact. Then you simply get 1 mark, if a mark at all. If you ask to explain the 5 principles of, let's say, community development, this means give more details, expound on these 5 principles. That means you have to write. If they are already provided, then you need to explain. If they are not, then you need to mention them and maybe explain. But you need to be able to differentiate between the different verbs. And the different verbs determine the mark allocation. Another common mistake made by students is students answer questions with the same statement used in the sentence asking the question. For example, a question might state, what is professional development? That's the question asked in the examination, that may be asked in the examination, or has been asked in previous examination papers. So, what is professional development? We've seen students answer something like this. Professional development, it is the development of the profession. So taking the same words used in the question paper, in the question itself, to answer the question, it's a repetition. You don't demonstrate understanding of the word development, nor profession, nor the word professional. So basically, you've just given me what I've given you back, and I can't give you a mark for that. It's basically my work that you've just returned to me. I want to see your work. So another example would be just a question from previous question papers, not to say that the question will be in the exam, is to ask, what is a profession? That is the question being asked. And a student would answer, it's a profession of the teacher. So the question is, what is a profession? So the student gave me back my words, or the words in the examination part of the question is, it is a profession of the teacher. So in terms of answering the question, it's wrong. You cannot use the same words used in the, and if you cannot use the same words used in the question to answer that question unless you're breaking down those concepts or adding something to it that would show that you understand what that term means or that concept means. Another example, a final examination of this common mistake is explain happiness as a characteristic of high emotional intelligence. That is a question that was asked in previous question papers. Explain happiness as a characteristic of high emotional intelligence. And the student answered, it is important to be happy so that everyone can be happy. The word happiness is not broken down. Emotional intelligence is not broken down. No explanation, no. The question is not expounded. It's not enlarged. It's not broken down. And that's what we require from students. So simply stating it is important to be happy so that everyone can be happy is not an answer. You simply took what you were given and gave it back. That's not effort. And therefore, students sometimes call and say, why did I get a 50% instead of a 70%? I know I studied. So these are some of the common mistakes that students make. A fourth common mistake that students make, students narrate stories instead of stating facts, then narrate briefly to illustrate the facts. So what this means is that, for example, let's go with the examples for me to better explain. What are the benefits of education? Just an example of a question. Not that it will come in the examination. What are the benefits of education? So, and then the question says, explain 4 facts. You may use examples to illustrate your answer. So that's the question as it's set up. The student would then answer, when I was a small girl, I said I want to be educated and I finished my school. My family was poor, but I said, no, I'll not be a poor woman. I did not play with boys, I just studied. Now I buy food, clothes for my family. I tell my learners, especially the girls, to take my example. And the student gets 1 mark. But if you look at the amount of information that is contained in this answer, it's a lot for you to get 1 mark. So where did you go wrong? You are told to state facts. The question is, what are the benefits of education? Explain 4 facts. You may use examples to illustrate your answer. So basically what the student has done, they just illustrated the answer without explaining or linking it to the facts. So you get 1 mark, and to be honest, you shouldn't even get a mark. So it's very important that you understand what it means to illustrate within a question, because then it just becomes storytelling and it has nothing to do with the facts. So be very careful of this pitfall. And we see it a lot of times with students, and you can see that the student knows the answer. But like I said, part of the aim for this presentation is to sort of familiarize students on how to approach an examination question. You have the facts, you've studied, but the skills of approaching the question paper still comes to play. So you need to be very careful of how you answer questions, because there you can lose marks. Moving on, I sort of broke down the question papers into units according to topics. So just because the question is stated here doesn't mean that it will come the way it's stated. But what I want students to focus on is the topics. And you know that in your guide, there are topics, there are headings. And so all the headings that are covered in the exam, like I said, I acknowledge the fact that students have other subjects to study, and that the guide itself is thick for one to study it from cover to cover in preparation for the exam. And so it's very important. And most of the questions, as much as they are state facts, they are also asking you to demonstrate your understanding. So sometimes you can study and memorize and still fail because you have not demonstrated your understanding. So it's very important that you understand from each unit what is required of you in the exam. Now remember, this is a combined presentation for people writing at different time slots. So, but at least this presentation gives you a narrower focus on the topics to study. So in the first unit, we want you to look at the very, very first terms, the concepts. The name of the subject is professional and community development. So it's imperative that you understand what is professional, what does it mean, profession, professional, professionalism, all these words that come from this word profession, and be able to explain it to the second person. And be able to understand these concepts would allow you to answer a lot of questions, because they are all connected to the theme of the subject. And the theme of the subject is professional and community development. So there is no way you can escape questions that involve these terms and concepts. So please understand profession and community development concepts. So in the first unit, know what profession means, know what professionalism means, know what being professional is all about. Now, be able to distinguish between the concept profession, professionalism, professional, all this. You need to be able, when are these terms used? Know the professional roles and responsibilities of teachers relating to parents, communities, and teaching. Now, these things are listed, these roles and responsibilities and duties are listed. We normally don't ask all of them. they are never asked all of them. So it's very important at least to understand where the roles fall, because we get students that give us this answer, but then when they are asked about the roles of teachers relating to parents, they would then write about the roles related to teaching. And that's not correct. They are roles of the teacher, but they are not related to parenting. They are related to parents. They are related to teaching or to the community or to the professional development. So it's very important that you can differentiate when the different roles. So if the question is asked for you to relate roles to communities, you cannot write roles relating to community. Then you don't get a mark. They are roles, but they are not related to that specific function. Moving on to Unit 2. Define the term professional development. Remember, it goes back again to the name of the subject or the module or the course, professional and community development. There's no way you can run away from these concepts. You need to understand these concepts. They are the basic concepts, and they form the foundation of understanding the content. You need to understand these concepts in order to understand the content of this subject. So, define the term professional development, the importance of professional development. Look at induction programs for new teachers. What is there? What is it that you are required to understand in terms of induction programs? Now, one of the challenges, one of the error that I've also picked up in marking past exam papers is that students simply don't know what is an induction program. So you might want to look at that. What is an induction program? Because if you are asked a question relating to an induction program and you don't know that that thing that you know is called an induction program, you won't be able to answer the question even though you might be sitting with the answers. So you might want to look at that. Please understand the concept of mentorship. We've also seen that students simply could not answer questions because they simply do not understand mentorship. Understand the duties and competencies of the mentor, as well as the mentee or the trainee teacher or the novel teacher. It's very important that you differentiate the different roles. Why this is important is that many times when students go for practicals or students graduate into the profession of teaching, there might be this wrong perception that you know everything, that you can simply start teaching. But it's very important for us to acknowledge the importance of experience in any profession. And this is where older teachers or teachers that have been in the profession longer than you sort of take you on and show you how things work in practice. So it's very important that students understand what are the different roles and competencies of both a mentor and a trainee teacher or a mentee. That means this person has graduated, they have their degree, but they lack the experience of teaching. So what are their roles and duties and competencies? Now, before I go on, it's just important to mention that the reason why understanding concepts is that most times we might not ask for definitions of concepts, or we might ask for definitions of concepts in addition to asking for more information. And if you do not understand that basic concept, you cannot answer the other questions. Okay, Unit 3. It's important that in Unit 3, it's about personal professional development. We all know that it's the responsibility of every teacher to ensure their continued development in the profession. That means you need to continue to grow and gain knowledge and understanding of the profession. It's not enough to have a degree or a diploma. You need to understand the profession as it develops. And then it's also very important to understand that as much as school can teach you a lot, it can't teach you everything. So when you get into the profession, that's when you discover there's a lot to learn. So in this unit, we want students to understand the challenges that Namibian teachers face in the teaching profession. Like I said, you graduate, but you don't know everything. So you find other teachers in the profession, and you might end up being in a complex situation. We know we have poverty and all these things that are mentioned in the guide, challenges that teachers face in executing their duties as teachers. So it's very important for you to be realistic when you enter the teaching profession to understand these things. Understand the advantages and disadvantages of computer-based technology. Computer-based technology is not a computer. Computer-based technology means anything that runs a software. These are tablets, cell phones, computers, anything, any electronic gadget operating a DVD, all these electronic gadgets. We know that education, like any other profession, needs to keep up with technology. It makes work easy, and it makes retrieving of information very, very easy. So it's important that teachers understand when they use technology that there are advantages and disadvantages of using technology in the classroom or on the school premises. And then we want teachers to understand the advantage and disadvantage of internet use. It's widely used, so we cannot ignore the dangers of internet use, as well as embrace the advantages of internet use. So please, teachers need to understand this, and this is why this question keeps creeping up. It keeps coming back, exam after exam, computer-based technology, internet use. And then lastly, we need students to understand the importance of workshops in professional development. Workshops are timeless. That means they don't fade. They are never old-fashioned. They keep going, because that's one platform where professional development can take place through workshops. Looking at Unit 4, define community development. Like I said, the name of the subject is professional and community development. You can't run away from the concepts. Understand the principles of community development as well as the features. You need to understand the difference between a principle and a feature, because we've seen students interchanging these two concepts. So they might write the principles at the features, and at the features they write the principles. So just be very careful that you understand the differences. Understanding the aptitudes that are important for principals and teachers to be effective leaders and change agents. This is one of the questions that most students just don't understand. They just fail this. They fail questions pertaining to this topic. Please study it and understand it. I understand it, when reading through it, it can seem challenging, but you need to understand it. So please understand the aptitudes that make teachers and principals good leaders and effective change agents. Another thing, understand the term gender disparity in education. If you don't understand the word disparity or gender disparity, you cannot answer the questions. You won't be able to answer the questions. So go back to your guide and understand the terms gender disparity in education, because it's an important concept in education. Unit 5, we look at emotional intelligence. Once again, the terminology. You need to understand the terminology. Why? Whether the question asks the definition or it asks a question related to emotional intelligence, if you don't know what emotional intelligence is, you cannot answer either of the questions. You can answer the definition, and you can answer the questions pertaining to emotional intelligence if you don't understand what it is. Know the differences between emotional intelligence and intelligence quotient. Cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence are two different types of intelligence, although they are interconnected. You need to understand the differences for you to be able to answer questions. And then understand the characteristics of when we say somebody has high emotional intelligence or somebody has low emotional intelligence. And a lot of times, students that have read through this, most times don't have to memorize it, because once you read through and you understand it, it's very easy to answer the questions. Because remember, in the question, we don't want you to regurgitate. We don't want you to bring back information as you read it. We want you to demonstrate understanding. And this is one of the questions. This unit is one of the units that are so easy for students to gain marks in the exam. because it requires more understanding than memorizing. And very important, understand the influence of emotional intelligence on professional growth. Why would that topic, emotional intelligence, be in the book if it's not connected to professional growth? So that is the key. Understanding how does then emotional intelligence help me in my professional growth? Why is it important? Understand what assertive communication is. So we're looking at the different styles of communication, and we mostly focus on assertive communication because that's the one style of communication that we want to inculcate in teachers. We want teachers to learn how to communicate assertively. So this is why we focus on this, even though there are other styles of communication. What are the benefits of assertive communication? The different communication styles, you might know them, but remember, you need to know the different types of communication styles, but we need you to know in details about assertive communication. And then talk about what the importance of having positive relationships with colleagues and how does that influence the success of the school. Moving on Unit 6, job searching skills. It's important for students to understand what is a CV. Now in the exam, you might not see the word CV because we want also students to know the proper full name of a CV, the curriculum vitae, and its purpose. We want you, why do you write a CV? And you'll be amazed by how many people graduate from universities and institutions of higher learning, and they simply don't know how to put a CV together. So it's important when you go job hunting that you have a proper CV that will be able to market you to be able to be called for an interview. And then no tips on how to write a proper CV. Like I said, you'll be amazed how people graduate from an institute of higher learning and still don't know how to write their own CV. So it's very important. Critique or analyze a letter of application, cover letter that might come, preparing for an interview, and then interview skills. So remember that the interview is divided into different stages. There's the before the interview, what do you need to know during the interview, after the interview. So the question might come with regard to any of those three stages of the interview. Is it before the interview, during the interview, or after the interview? Those are things that students need to understand. Moving on, Unit 7, which is our last unit, is about how to start up an entrepreneurial business. And now, in the 21st century, we have people that have graduated from institutions of higher learning with different degrees and diplomas, but they don't all end up in that profession or directly connected to that profession. They go into business. A lot of young people want to be entrepreneurs. And therefore, this is why this topic is included, to say that you have options. We know that we have teachers that are billionaires. We have teachers that are employed in other job categories other than the education sector. So it's very important that you understand that you have options in the business world. So you need to understand what is entrepreneurship. What is an entrepreneur? What are the characteristics of a successful entrepreneur? Or what kind of qualities do you need to have for you to go into business with your education qualification or any other qualification? So many businesses fail because people simply do not consider these factors. That it's a career. Being a business person, it's a career just like any other career, and that you need to qualify for it, or at least work towards qualifying for that sector, the business sector. It's not enough that you're a teacher and you go into business. And then you need to understand key questions to ask before starting a business. So this whole unit is about guiding you to understand the business world, how it works, and what you need to do in order to enter the business world. So we are encouraging students, when they get their qualifications, to also, whether full-time or part-time, consider venturing into business. Look at business options in the education sector and guidelines on how to start them. the most famous, the most common examples when we ask students to mention or give guidelines on a business venture is normally daycare. But I think there's room for students, not that we would not accept answers based on daycare. It's very good. By all means, go ahead and give us the daycare. But it would be nice if students would be brave enough to look at the other options stated in the guide. Daycare is easy because they are widely practiced, but it would be nice for students to look at the other options in the education field other than just starting a kindergarten or pre-primary school. Look at the other business options like selling toys or school materials or being a consultant. Look at the other options of going into business in the education field other than daycare. So, this is basically in the nutshell what you need to do to prepare for the exam, in addition to studying. In conclusion, just to take out 4 key points from this whole presentation. Study the verbs in the guidebook. It's not enough for you to study the content. You need to understand the verbs, because many students lose marks because they lack understanding of the verb. Know the definition of key concepts. Like I stated over and over in this presentation, the name of the subject or the course or the module is Professional and Community Development, PCD. So you need to understand what is profession, what is community, what is professional development, what is community development, because basically almost all the questions hinges on understanding these 2 or 3 concepts. So you need to understand the concepts, because most times it's frustrating because you know the student knows the answer, but because they don't know the meaning of the word, they fail. So please know the key concepts. The old classic timeless advice to students: study and study to understand. Yes, we can do tricks, we have all these study tips where you memorize and put alphabets to the facts and write your own word and say banana. So when you get to the question, you write down banana because you know the B stands for what and the A. All these tricks you do. But what we're saying is that high institutions are not like high school, in the sense that a lot of times in high school, we were asked many times to regurgitate information, to memorize and present the facts, most of the time in high school. But then institutions of higher learning are asking you to demonstrate understanding. So study and study to understand. Don't just memorize facts. Like I said, one of the common mistakes is that students would see the word, for example, community development, and they would just write anything that they can remember that they read on community development. And that's where they lose marks, because those facts they stated do not match the question. So study and study to understand the content. And finally, read the questions carefully before you start writing. Like I said, one of the reasons why students would write and then just scratch and then write at the bottom or write on top or any other space on the margins is because they did not read the instructions first. Or they just skimmed through the question, they thought they understand it, and then started writing. The golden rule is to read a question 3 times before writing. You just read it 3 times before you start writing. That especially long questions that have a sentence, a long sentence or 2 or 3 sentences, you need to go through 3 times before you start writing. That ensures that you understand the content of the question and what it requires of you. So I firmly believe that students study, but they fail or they get lower marks because they don't know how to approach the question paper. So it's very important that you go through the general rules go through the verbs, and then study to understand. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best, and I've written my cell phone number. It's on the most assignments. And please call me between 6 in the evening to 7 in the evening. I do sometimes accommodate students, but those sometimes I'm not able to answer my cell phone on any other time. So those are the best times that I can accommodate students. If you call me, I'm not picking up, send an SMS, I'll get back to you. Thank you very much.